Story 1. It's been over 6 years since this has happened, but I still wake up in a cold sweat every now and then. I started using Reddit about 2 months ago, and just now discovered this subreddit. I think this would be a good place to share my experience and ask if anybody knows what I encountered. I won't disclose where I went camping, because I'm afraid it's still out there. I will say it's in the west region of America with some good forests. Anyway, let's get started. My girlfriend, now wife, and I were going through a tough time. Her father had just died, and I had lost my license because of speeding. We needed something to take our minds off everything, so we decided to go camping. We were both nature people. Deal with it. After about 2 weeks of planning, we found a good time and spot. In that 2-week period, I managed to get my license back. So that was good. For this story, I won't give my girlfriend's real name for privacy reasons, so her name will be Elizabeth. We packed all the essentials we would need for a week out in the woods. Tents, clothing, first aid kit, flashlights, a lighter, food, a cooler, knives, a machete, $150 for an emergency, playing cards, a guitar, etc. Also, I bought a CZ USA 85 combat pistol just in case. Thank God I did. We packed all of our things into the car, and we were on our way. I'll spare you the 4-hour drive. We stopped at a Burger King about 9 miles away from the destination to recharge our batteries and to stretch. Elizabeth pulled out her phone and looked at the weather, only to see that it was going to rain for the entire week. Great. Now what are we going to do? She asked. I guess we should get to the campsite to set up the tents before it's too late, I suggested. We did just that. When we got to the campsite, it started to rain a bit, so we started to unpack as fast as we could. While we were unpacking, we noticed that this campsite was recently used, and the people who were previously there had no respect for nature. There was garbage everywhere. Every third step you would hit a can of beer or a plastic bag, and I think at one point I saw an unopened box of tampons. The wind started to pick up too, so all the trash began to fly around in random directions. When we finally got the tent set up and things inside, the rain really started to come down. We managed to secure the tent well, but the rain fly almost blew off. While Elizabeth remained inside to set up the cots, I went out with my poncho and a hammer to secure the rainfly. While pounding the stakes into the ground, I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me. I don't know why, I just felt uneasy. It was as if something was watching me over my shoulder, and I didn't know. By now, it was getting pretty dark. If I had to guess, it was about 8:45-ish. I finished securing the rainfly and was about to head inside when I heard a howl a distance away. I thought it might be wolves, but it sounded off, like a cross between a scream from a human and a howl from a coyote. I got goosebumps. I headed inside and zipped the door shut. Elizabeth and I snuggled until we both fell asleep. For the next 2 days, nothing too eventful happened. But the third night is when it appeared. There was no rain that night either. As we were sleeping, I woke up to the same howl I heard the 2 days prior. But the thing that scared me the most is that it was closer. I shook Elizabeth's shoulder to wake her up. She gave me a partial half-asleep stare. Babe, there's something out there. I was cut off by the howl again. But now it was like 200 yards away. That was enough to wake her. She sat up with sweat pouring down her face and shirt. Why is it coming towards us? Elizabeth said with fear in her eyes. That's when it dawned on me. We left some of the food outside after making dinner. It was probably going for our food. We sat in the tent holding each other, shaking with fear in the pitch-black dark. All of a sudden we hear the howl again, but it was deafening. It was at our campsite. We heard it walking around looking for the food. Well, it found it. We heard what sounded like muffled screaming and loud thumping as it devoured our rations. Elizabeth was hugging me tight and crying into my shoulder, I was frozen just staring into the direction of the noise. The thing kept making these noises and screaming for like 3 minutes, until Elizabeth sobbed into me making a noise. The thing stopped eating. It knew we were there. I embraced Elizabeth and started to silently cry too. This thing started to walk towards us. I thought, if I'm going to die here, I won't want to go down without a fight. I felt around for 2 things, my flashlight and my gun. I found those 2 things in about 2 seconds. I turned on my flashlight and pointed it into the direction the thing was. What I saw made me scream. I saw the silhouette of a creature the size of a full-grown German shepherd, but way skinnier, through my tent wall. But what scared me the most was that it stood up on its hind legs and began to touch the tent. I snapped out of it and took 1 shot at the thing. It let out the most haunting, blood-curdling scream. I can't even describe it in words. Then I kid you not, it turned around and ran away on 2 legs. We stayed awake for the rest of the night, fearing it might come back. Luckily it didn't, but we still heard its screams. At the crack of dawn, we grabbed all we could, jumped into my car and drove out of that area as fast as we could. There was no time to even dismantle the tent. We ended up staying in a hotel for the rest of the trip. That spare cash we bought was worth it. We ended up leaving half of our stuff in the woods, but we didn't care. During the whole car ride out of the area, Elizabeth was crying and hugging my arm. After we returned home, we moved 1 month later. Elizabeth ended up going to therapy for 4 months to recover. We now have a baby boy, and are living far from our old home and the woods. We actually have a fear of camping now, but we live in a city, so there's no problem. If anybody knows what we saw, please let me know. And may God return that thing that we saw back to its home. Hell. Before I continue to the next story, I just want to say thank you for choosing to watch this video, and I hope you are enjoying my narration. If you like my storytelling, please show your appreciation by liking this video and subscribing to my channel. It really helps me out. Thanks again. Story 2. I feel like it's just an obligation to say that I too am a skeptic. I've been trying to convince myself I didn't see a large, hairy, humanoid thing in the woods all those years ago. But I did. This was somewhere around the mid-2000s when I was in middle school. I was staying at a friend's house for the night in the backwoods of Michigan. For privacy, we'll say his name is Jay. Immediately behind Jay's house was a few acres of woods that led to a lake. If you went straight back into the woods from his backyard, there was a path that went straight to the lake, which was intersected at 90 degrees by another path about halfway to the lake. Probably a quarter mile from the backyard to the lake. If you went straight down the path from the backyard and then turned left at the intersection, the path was a downhill grade, followed by a flat portion, followed by an uphill grade, which eventually ran into a 2-lane country road. One of those 55 miles per hour ones that goes on for miles with not so much as 2 houses on it. It was late in the afternoon and the sun was just starting to set. We, being middle school boys, were running around the woods all afternoon playing with fake guns and stuff. Good times. Absolutely nothing leading up to this point was strange. No weird eerie feelings, no odd unidentified sounds, no paranoia or ghost stories prior to playing in the woods. Just 2 bros running around having a great time outside. Well, we were basically pretending we were army guys. At one point, Jay decided to run off saying something about flanking the enemy. He dashes off to my left. I started creeping through the woods pretending to shoot down bad guys as we went. I found myself standing at the intersection described earlier. Straight forward was towards the lake. To the left was the path that went down, then back up to the road. I was standing looking diagonally between the 2 paths when I hear some faint sound slightly off to my right towards the lake. What I saw made my whole body tingle, in the worst possible way. About 50 feet, maybe more, maybe less, towards the lake, and just behind a tree, I see this face and shoulder and arm peeking around it. The most terrifying part was that it was probably 2 or 3 feet more higher than you'd expect a human's head to be. Before I could properly observe the face, which was undoubtedly hairy, it snapped back behind the tree as if I realized I could see it. The color of the figure I saw was light grey, like your average cement sidewalk. Because of this, I was unsure of what it was. Then, in my frozen state, I remembered that Jay was wearing a shirt almost exactly that shade of grey. I tried whisper shouting his name towards the now hidden figure. I called out maybe 2 or 3 times when, off about 50 feet behind me and to my left, down the path leading towards the road, Jay emerged from the thicker trees. This was the complete opposite direction from the figure I saw, and there's no way he could have snuck around me in that short of a time frame. To further drive the point home, it was fall, and the ground was covered in layers of dry, dead, deciduous leaves. The crunch from the leaves was very distinct, and you couldn't avoid it. Anyways, Jay's heard me call out, and from just down the slight decline, he looked up and asked what was going on. I pointed off into the trees where I had seen a figure and said at a normal volume, "I saw something big over there." As soon as I finished the sentence, the very second, whatever I had seen started stomping off towards the road parallel to the path we were on, but probably 50 to 100 feet deeper in the woods. Woods which were too thick to see anything at that distance. For some godforsaken reason, we tried to run after it. Jay and I were athletic as 6th or 7th graders could be. We played tons of sports and we were fast kids. We were hauling ass down the path parallel to the beast as fast as we could sprint, and yet it was absolutely smoking us. The road, if I remember correctly, was a solid 1/4 mile from the intersection of the 2 paths. We had maybe just finished running down the downhill portion when this monster was already to the road. And believe it or not, we could tell where it was from the crunching leaves, as you could hear its massive footsteps clear as day, even while running. When we realized he was getting to the road, we also realized a car was coming. I kid you not, as soon as the crunching leaves stopped and the thing stepped out onto the road, the car slammed on its brakes and pounded on the horn. Its tires screeched for a solid 3 to 4 seconds at least. When the car finally stopped, we heard the leaves start crunching on the other side of the road. Then the car slammed on the gas, peeled out again, and took off like a bat out of hell. Keep in mind we could only hear all of this. We didn't see the car, so there's no way we could ever track the person down to ask what they saw. But I wouldn't be surprised if their story is out there on the internet somewhere. Anyways, we finally made it to the road and crossed to the other side. On that side, it was almost flat woods as far as the eye could see. Nothing but trees, trees, and more trees. No sight nor sound of the beast. We waited for a bit, then went back home. Story 3. I am writing this down so that what exists on this property may never be forgotten. I only hope that I can warn those who inevitably come after me. My family has owned this 120-acre farm for more than 3 generations. Unfortunately, however, it will all end with me. My parents had a total of 3 children, with myself being the oldest. I never did end up getting married, and my 2 younger brothers were involved in a tragic wolf attack one day while working at the far end of our field by the edge of the forest. As soon as our father heard the screaming, he grabbed his rifle that he always kept beside him and started running. He was too far away though. He ran as fast as he could with all his adrenaline, but all he was able to do was watch as the wolf ripped a hole in his son's stomach and sink its teeth deeply into the other's neck. He shot on the wolf and it missed. It stared at him without the least bit of fear in its eyes and slowly released my brother's neck from its teeth before scurrying into the forest. My father was never the same after that day. He would never talk about it. The small town we lived in was also affected deeply by this back then. The story made the headlines in the local newspaper. They were only the ages 12 and 14. About 3 years later, when I was in my late teens, my mother fell very ill from something the doctor at the time couldn't diagnose. She would get frequent headaches, and she would slip in and out of unresponsive coma-like states. One day, however, she never came out of it, and her body slowly shut down over the course of a week. After this, my father's mental stability began to fade away. I began to notice that every night he would sit on the dark front porch with his rifle in his lap, just staring off into the distance. Whenever I would approach him about it, he would always have a worried look on his face and just give me the same wild answer. "That wolf is still out there," he would say. "Something ain't right about that wolf." One night, I awoke to a series of gunshots. I swiftly raised up and sat on the edge of my bed. There was an odd orange glow lighting up the curtains of my bedroom window. It flickered for a few moments, and then it was gone. I quickly made my way downstairs. When I reached the front door, I heard my father yelling. "You won't take anything else away from me," he shouted. "Go back to where you came from, you vicious beasts." I flipped the porch lights on and I opened the door to see him attempting to reload his magazine. His arms were shaking uncontrollably, causing him to drop his handful of bullets. "Dad," I called to him, "what the hell are you shooting at? You're going to hit some of the cattle." I scanned the field in front of us, but all I could see was the sea of corn swaying in the cool night breeze. My father bent down to pick up the bullets and turned his head to look at me. There were tears running down his face. He opened his mouth to say something, but at first all that came out was a choky exhale caused by his violent shaking. Then he spoke. "I saw them. They didn't know I was here. They didn't think I could see." He trailed off for a few moments before saying something that truly perplexed me. They aren't from here." His eyes widened as if the reality of the situation made its way back to him. "Come on, son. We have to get inside before they come back," he said sternly. I followed him through the front doorway and gave one last look toward the field before shutting and locking the door. I then went into the living room to find my father passed out on the couch with his rifle under his arm. I grabbed it and emptied the chamber before setting it down on the floor beside him. He turned on his side as I laid a blanket on top of him. At this point, I was wide awake and I couldn't help but ponder the night's events until the morning when I finally fell asleep on the recliner next to the couch. When I woke up, my father had made a full breakfast for us and set up the dining table at which to eat. "Hey there, you'd better hurry up before this gets cold," he said, smiling as he sat a plate of bacon on the table. I rubbed my eyes and gave him a questioning look. He seemed like a completely different person than the scared, shaking man from the night before. When I tried to bring it up, he simply shrugged it off and said not to worry about it, that he'd just had a rough night. "You know, son, I've been thinking," he said. "It's about time I showed you how to do all the other stuff around the farm that you've been asking about. You're a grown man now, and it's time I passed on my responsibilities to you." Part of me was curious as to the odd timing of his revelation, but I couldn't help be excited to learn the things that I had watched him do all my life. We spent the next few days from dawn till dusk working in the field. He showed me how to operate the tractor, sent me on errands, and showed me everything I would need to know for the day that I would take over the farm. It was really nice to see my father this way after all these years, but I still had an uneasy feeling in my stomach. A week later, I would find out why. I started the day like any other and got dressed to begin my morning chores. I went downstairs and saw that my father was already gone. I assumed that he just had an earlier start than I did. I laced my boots up and headed out to the barn where I expected to meet him. There was still no sign of him. "Dad?" I called out for him. "Where are you?" I glanced around the property back and forth looking for some kind of movement. Nothing. I decided to go ahead and walk down the old hunting trail that borders the forest. A few 100 feet down the path, something caught my eye. My father's rifle was leaning against the old abandoned well from the very first homestead. My stomach dropped. He never left his rifle anywhere. Period. "Dad," I said as I slowly walked towards the well. When I got close enough, I could see that there was blood dripping from inside the roof of the well. My eyes began to water. No, I thought as I stepped even closer. Close enough to see a single bullet hole through the roof of the well. My knees grew weaker and I finally made it to the edge of the well. I peered inside. To this day, I will never be able to unsee the mangled, contorted body of my father at the bottom of that well. I will always be cursed with the memory of those cold, dead green eyes facing up and looking right through me. They were not his eyes. Not anymore. I fell to the ground and began sobbing uncontrollably. I have never stopped blaming myself for not seeing how damaged he was, for not seeing why he chose that week to train me on all the things he had been putting off. It has weighed heavily on me for 7 years now. After I called to report his death, I swore to myself that I would follow through on his last wish and take care of this farm. From that point forward, I put all of my emotions into tilling, ploughing, building, and general upkeep. Once the grief had subsided, I found it a lot easier to carry on. That was until a few days ago. I was doing my normal round of putting out fresh feed for the animals when I noticed something off to my left. All of the cattle were huddled together and acting very upset. I hopped the gate and made my way through the cattle to see what they were crowded around. What I found made me take a step back. One of my dairy cows was lying on its back with its stomach torn open, 3 long gashes from its udders to its throat. It smelled horribly. I ran as fast as I could to get to the gate and lean against it as I threw up. I wiped my mouth and looked back at the rotting corpse. How the hell did I not hear this poor thing screaming? I thought. I held my elbow over my nose and mouth so I could get close enough to search around the cow. There didn't seem to be any sign of whatever it was trying to eat it, which I found odd. A predator wouldn't leave its fresh kill untouched. Then I saw it. "Fuck," I said aloud to myself. Wolf paw prints. One single set of huge tracks. I followed the tracks leading away from its kill for about 100 feet towards the forest tree line. It had rained the previous day, so luckily the tracks were easy enough to make out. As I got closer to the line of trees, I saw something that I couldn't make sense of. The set of 4 paw prints suddenly turned into 2 prints, with a long stride between them. I immediately stopped and noticed my breathing become more rapid. I couldn't bring myself to go any further towards the dark woods. I didn't have to. I could see that about 10 feet from where the tracks changed, they came to an abrupt stop. Right at the end of the trail, there was a marking in the dirt that almost looked burned. The marking resembled a circle with a series of triangles in it. I had never seen anything like it before in my life. When I got back to the house, I poured myself a tall glass of bourbon and sat down at the dining table. What kind of wolf stands up and walks on 2 feet? I asked myself. I called the local sheriff to let him know about my mauled cow, and to let the other farmers in the area know to keep an eye on their livestock. He expressed his condolences and thanked me for calling it in. I spent the rest of the day cleaning the dead cow and storing the meat in my deep freezer. If there's one thing I learned from being a caretaker of a farm, it's that you don't let anything go to waste. Luckily, the cold of the winter kept the meat from spoiling. Later that night, I was sitting on the couch reading through some of the old newspapers that my father would hoard. I always liked following in his footsteps wherever I could. I went through a stack of 3 or so until I came upon one with a captivating title. Midville farmers mourn the tragic loss of their 2 sons. I stared at the headline for a few moments. As I read through the paragraphs detailing my mother's interview on the incident, one question stood out to me. Interviewer: Were you able to see the wolf for yourself? Some rumours are saying that this wolf might be related to the town's folklore. Are you familiar with the legend of the Midville Dogman? Helen, don't even start with that. My daddy used to tell me these stories as a kid just to scare me away from getting lost in the woods. They're nothing but nonsense. Midville Dogman, I thought. I wonder why I'd never heard of it before if it's such a legend in this town. As it got late, I started to doze off. The newspaper slipped out of my hands and fell to the floor. I decided it was time to turn in for the night. My eyes flew open and I shot up in my bed when I heard a loud bang coming from downstairs. I grabbed my father's rifle and paused to listen. The next sound that I heard was a deep and long scraping noise coming from the front porch. This was followed by a few evenly spaced thuds. Footsteps, I thought. I raised myself off the bed, pointed the rifle in front of me, and carefully made my way down the steps. When I got to the bottom and turned the corner, I could see a bright orange light shining through the windows on the front side of the house. I walked closer to the front door. I put my hand on the doorknob and opened the door. What I then saw in the field I don't think I will ever be able to fully explain. A few 100 feet from the house there was a large glowing oval shape. It hovered above the ground a few feet, and its edges appeared to be on fire. Despite how far it was from me, I could still see it shimmering. It was almost hypnotizing. My attention turned slightly to the right, however, when I saw a large silhouetted figure running on all fours towards this light. My mouth dropped. In my life, I had never seen an animal this big in the area. Once it reached its destination, it paused. The great beast elevated its head slightly, and I could tell it was smelling the air. Then it cocked its head to the left, and I could make out 2 red glowing dots facing my direction. My eyes widened. I took a step back and aimed my rifle at it. I didn't notice it before, but I was shaking uncontrollably. It was at this point that I heard an awful cracking noise coming from the direction of the beast. I watched in horror as the thing in a jerky and unnatural way stood up on its hind legs. My knees buckled beneath me, and I collapsed backwards from fright. I used my feet and hands to back myself further back into the house. The beast slightly raised its arms and cocked its head back. It then let out the most spine-chilling roar I have ever heard. I could feel it vibrating in my chest. The fear within me was so overwhelming that tears started to flow down my face. Then the beast slowly backed itself towards the orange circle. As it got closer, I almost thought I could see its hair catch on fire. Whenever it backed fully into the light, there was a bright flash and the circle collapsed into itself. The night was dark again. Everything was so quiet that I could hear my blood pumping in my head. The beast had vanished. Still shaking, I forced myself to my feet. In all the confusion, I didn't see what lay at the top of the steps on the front porch. I jumped back when I saw 3 decapitated cow heads facing the front door. There was a line of blood and fleshy chunks leading straight to the threshold. On the wooden door, there were 3 deep and widespread claw marks that stretched from the top left corner to the bottom right. There was still blood dripping through the freshly made grooves. I sat on the couch with my rifle pointed at the front door until the sun came up this morning. Today, as I'm writing this, my bags are packed and I'm leaving my family home. I now understand what drove my father to commit such an unspeakable act. I can sense in my gut that the dismembered cows and marks on the door were warnings. I am not welcome here anymore. No one is welcome anymore. I have no idea what that thing was, or where it came from. I do know that it was not a wolf or anything remotely close to that. I could feel a higher sense of intelligence. Whether or not that dark beast came from another world or even hell itself, I'll never know. I think I'll be happy to never know. I just pray that I am able to leave whatever it was behind me on this property. To any of you that find this letter that I am leaving, please heed my warning and leave this place. It is not safe here, especially at night. Thank you for watching and/or listening to this video. If you enjoyed it, please go ahead and show your appreciation by tapping on that like button. And if you're new to my channel and enjoy listening to my narrations, please help my channel to grow by subscribing and hitting that notification bell. Do also leave a comment to let me know what you thought of these stories and let me know if there's any type of stories you would like to hear in the future. If you happen to have a story you would like me to narrate on this channel, please reach out to me at mrsinisterstories@gmail.com. These could be stories you've already published on Reddit or on any other platform. Just as long as you own the full rights to it and are able to give me permission to narrate it, I really don't mind. Thanks again for watching.